All right, let's dive in. Today, it's Malcolm X. We're going deep with his biography, trying to understand what made him such a powerful force, in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Hopefully, by the end of this, we'll all have a clearer picture of not just who he was, but how his thinking evolved and why his message still resonates today.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? His life story, it's almost like a novel, full of hardship and transformation. It really shows you how personal experience shapes a person's ideology.
I mean, just look at his early life. It's kind of like a recipe for becoming disillusioned with the system. You know what I mean?
Well, think about it. His father, a supporter of Marcus Garvey, was murdered, probably by white supremacists.
Wow.
Then his mother's institutionalized. He and his siblings split up, sent to different foster homes. Imagine the impact that has on a kid.
Yeah, it's no wonder he started to question the fairness of society.
Exactly. And that questioning, it just intensifies during his time in prison. Arrested for larceny, sentenced to 10 years.
That's a tough break for anybody.
Yeah, but for Malcolm, it's like a forced awakening.
This is where he gets involved with the Nation of Islam.
Yep. His brother Reginald introduces him to their teachings, and it just clicks for him. He converts, adopts the name Malcolm X, and that's where things really take off.
So prison, instead of being a dead end, becomes like his launching pad.
In a way, yeah. He dives into the prison library, educating himself, and the Nation of Islam gives him this framework to understand the racism and injustice he's experienced.
He rises through the ranks pretty quickly, right? Becomes a minister, starts new temples, builds a following.
He was charismatic, and his rhetoric was powerful. He spoke about Black empowerment, self-determination, didn't shy away from making people uncomfortable.
I've seen some of his quotes, and they're intense. Very direct, very potent.
He knew how to connect, especially with those who were frustrated. This was during the civil rights movement, remember? Segregation was still the norm. His message, about self-defense, separation from white society, resonated with a lot of people.
It was a very different approach than, say, Martin Luther King Jr. with his focus on nonviolence and integration. It's interesting to compare them.
It is. You've got these two iconic figures, both fighting for racial justice, but with totally different tactics. King believed in appealing to America's conscience, while Malcolm X believed in Black people building their own power base.
And that difference highlights just how complex the civil rights movement was. It wasn't just one monolithic thing. It was a lot of different ideas about the best way to achieve equality.
Right, and even with their contrasting approaches, both leaders were ultimately striving for the same thing: freedom and equality for Black Americans.
But then things take a turn with Malcolm X, right?
Mhm.
He doesn't stay with the Nation of Islam forever.
Right, he becomes disillusioned, particularly with Elijah Muhammad, the leader. There were allegations of hypocrisy, misconduct. It really affected Malcolm X. This break, it wasn't just a personal thing. It signifies a major shift in his thinking.
So it was more than just a strategic disagreement. It was a deeper issue.
Exactly. He felt betrayed, like the organization he dedicated himself to wasn't living up to its own ideals. And this leads him to his pilgrimage to Mecca.
Yeah, that pilgrimage seems to have been a real turning point for him.
Oh, it was profound. Seeing the unity among Muslims of all races in Mecca, it really challenged his previous beliefs about racial separation. It was the catalyst for a broader, more inclusive vision of social justice.
This is where we see him starting to change, to evolve.
Absolutely. His break with the Nation of Islam, that experience in Mecca, those are the key moments. That's where we see him move away from Black nationalism. He converts to traditional Islam, taking the name Al-Hajj Mili al-Shabazz, starts advocating for a more universal approach to human rights.
So he's still all about racial justice, but his understanding of it is expanding.
He begins to see the fight for racial justice as part of a global fight against oppression, against colonialism, against all forms of exploitation. He even started expressing some socialist ideas, linking racial justice with economic justice.
Wow, it's amazing how much he was able to adapt and grow. He was on a real journey.
He never stopped challenging his own beliefs, never stopped learning from new experiences. That's what makes him so compelling. He wasn't stuck in one place. He was a dynamic thinker, always evolving.
And it's tragic that his life was cut short. Assassinated at just 39, right when his thinking was taking these fascinating new directions.
It was a huge loss. He was a beacon of change. It makes you wonder what else he might have accomplished if he'd lived longer. But even in his short life, he left behind a powerful legacy that's still with us today. It's amazing. Even decades later, people are still grappling with his impact. He was such a magnetic figure, so controversial, challenged so many norms.
He definitely wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers. And, I think that's part of why he's still so relevant today. The things he was talking about, racial justice, economic inequality, the fight against oppression. I mean, we're still dealing with those same issues.
Yeah, absolutely. His message of empowerment, especially for Black Americans, really struck a chord. Those who felt marginalized, unheard. And his early rhetoric, the stuff about self-defense, might seem a little jarring now. But it's crucial to understand the historical context.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you got to remember the times. Rampant segregation, constant threat of violence, his message of self-reliance, self-defense. It was a response, to a system that wasn't protecting them.
So it wasn't about promoting aggression. It was more about empowering a community that was being denied basic rights.
Exactly. It was about agency, taking back power in a society that was designed to keep them powerless.
And it's interesting how he was able to move beyond those initial, very fiery statements. Later on, he starts talking about universal human rights, bridging racial divides.
That's the thing about Malcolm X. He wasn't stagnant, always learning, growing, adapting his worldview based on new experiences, new insights. I think that's what makes him so complex, so fascinating.
He wasn't afraid to admit when he was wrong, to change his mind.
That kind of honesty, it's rare. And it's so valuable. It reminds us that we should all be open to challenging our own beliefs, embrace new perspectives.
Now, there's been some news lately about the investigation into his assassination that's really brought his legacy back into focus. His family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, right?
Yeah, against a bunch of government agencies. The FBI, CIA, NYPD, they're alleging a conspiracy in his death and a cover-up that's gone on for decades.
That's a pretty serious accusation. What's the basis of the lawsuit?
Well, they claim that these agencies knew about the plan to kill Malcolm X, but they didn't do anything to stop it. And they say that evidence was withheld from the family, preventing them from getting justice.
If that's true, that would be a huge revelation
Yeah.
about the level of government involvement.
Oh, yeah. It raises a lot of questions about how far those agencies went to silence dissent, target Black activists during that era.
It really emphasizes how relevant Malcolm X still is today. His story is part of this larger conversation about racial justice, accountability, and the struggle for equality.
Absolutely. It's not just history. It's about confronting those systemic issues that are still with us. The fight that Malcolm X embodied is far from over.
It's like his story is a microcosm of the whole fight for civil rights in America.
You could say that, yeah. His life, it captures all of it. The pain, the frustration, the hope, that unwavering pursuit of equality that's defined the movement for generations.
It's remarkable how his legacy keeps inspiring us, challenging us to push for a more just and equitable world.
His story reminds us that achieving true equality, it takes constant work, vigilance, a willingness to face those uncomfortable truths head on.
So we've covered a lot here. A condensed but hopefully impactful look at Malcolm X. From his tough childhood to his rise in the Nation of Islam to that ultimate shift toward a more inclusive vision of justice.
Yeah, and hopefully it inspires you to dig deeper, Check out his writings, his speeches. There's so much more to uncover there.
Even though his life was cut tragically short, Malcolm X left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us. What do you think his most important message was? What resonates with you most from his life and his words? This lawsuit, it feels like it's part of something bigger, like a reckoning, reassessing those injustices of the past, pushing for accountability.
Yeah, I think you're right to make that connection. The Malcolm X case, it's just one example, right, of this whole movement to re-examine history, especially how Black Americans have been treated, uncovering the legacies of slavery, Jim Crow, systemic racism, trying to address that. It's about acknowledging the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, and then working to repair the harm that's been done.
It's like recognizing that the fight for justice, it never really ends. It's not a one-time thing.
Exactly. It takes constant work, critical thinking, questioning the way things are. That's what Malcolm X did throughout his life. He never stopped pushing, never stopped evolving.
And his story, even though it ended tragically, almost offers a model for that kind of evolution. Personal growth, but also social progress.
His life shows us it's possible to change, to learn, to adapt, even when things are tough. And that's a message that speaks to everyone, no matter the generation.
So bringing it back to you, our listener, we've tried to give you a glimpse into Malcolm X, a condensed version, but hopefully impactful. From his difficult childhood to his rise with the Nation of Islam to that ultimate shift towards a more inclusive idea of justice.
And we hope it makes you want to learn more, Read his writings, his speeches. There's so much more to discover there.
Even though his life was cut short, Malcolm X left this incredible legacy, one that continues to inspire and challenge us. So what do you think? What was his most important message? What resonates with you the most from his life, from his words?